Dr. Mark Andrew Halifax, Ukrainian-American philosopher and historian, author of some 75 books, 5 of which are on Ukraine, 31 of which are on Thomas Jefferson. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Eye on Ukraine. Now, the purpose of this show is to shed light, as I've said before, both expositorily and critically on the history and culture of Ukraine. With the ongoing war in Ukraine, well, in its 4th year, the focus of this show, unfortunately, is often the war. And today's episode will be no different. Now, I want to showcase an event that got less attention than it ought to have received. A video of Gary Kasparov, the former Russian chess grandmaster, when he was speaking about the war in Ukraine. And he gave a severe tongue lashing both to the USA and to NATO. And it's well worth reviewing that. Let's go on to screen. Now at the forum, Kasparov had this to say. I'll read through it, then I'll offer a link for those of you who would like to watch what he had to say. It's about 3 minutes long, not quite 3 minutes long. It's a very emotional speech, so I do urge you, after brief analysis of this, to watch it. And very animated as well, very passionate, and I think very, very forceful speech. He got much done in less than 3 minutes. He speaks of the war. Now, he's addressed because someone in the audience had a question for Kasparov. And when asked to speak, she said, well, I know Mr. Kasparov is very uneasy as he's sitting there. If he's got something on his mind, I just want to know what's it. He's ready to explode or something like that. And he was. So he goes, Kasparov fidgets in his seat and says, this is the best Putin could hope for. No responsible response. He's talking to the United States and NATO with respect to that 28-point peace plan that was whipped up by Russia, sanctioned by the United States. I assume that Witkoff and his buddies there had some part in creating the peace plan. It's not a question of how many troops or ammunition you have. It's a question of whether you're ready to fight and die. Very powerful line. Oh, it's wonderful. You have a Canadian brigade in Latvia. What's its mandate? Will they shoot at the Russians across the border? We know the answer. You'll deliberate. He goes and says, you're going to sit there. It'll take months for anything to happen because you're going to sit there and discuss what to do. The Russians do. NATO and the West discusses what to do. I still haven't heard an answer. How can we seriously talk about a deal made by Trump's business partner, Witkoff? This is a real deal that supports the Trump family and sells out Ukraine. Now, that's a very important point that a lot of people don't get at. Trump doesn't give a shit about the people dying. He doesn't give a shit about the war. He doesn't really care about ending the war. He only wants to see a deal. And as Kasparov said, it's a deal that benefits Donald Trump, where he can make billions of dollars, right? And the deal that best suits his interests, and this is what I think is going on, is why he keeps coming back to Putin. Putin probably has something on him, and if not, he keeps coming back to Putin because Putin has more to offer. Russia owns 1/6 of the globe, and perhaps behind closed doors on their secret telephone calls, they're talking about if Russia gets Ukraine, those aspects of Ukraine, or gets all of Ukraine. Putin's going to cut a very handsome deal with Trump and make Trump really look good and make Trump a very, very wealthy man, much more than he already is. Says, how can we seriously discuss that Ukraine should give up territories, saving Europe? This is the point he's going to come to. Ukraine is really in a proxy war for Europe. Putin's real opposition in the war is the West, is NATO. And he's fighting against NATO in general and hoping to have the United States as a partner, at least neutral. His aim is always to split, to divide and conquer in that way. So he's always trying to break up NATO, trying to separate the United States. He's doing a damn good job of that from NATO. So long as Trump's in office, that's going to happen probably. And the idea is divide and conquer. That's always been his goal. That's Putin's goal. NATO doesn't exist. It's fake. NATO, 4 letters. Why are you still sitting around being cute? Ukraine is bleeding every minute. This is a huge defense. If not for Ukraine, Russian tanks would already be in Poland. What he's getting at here, and he's right on, it's spot on, he's right on the money, is that Russia just doesn't want to take Ukraine. They want to get back Poland, the Balkan territories, and so forth. They want to get back those countries that found their independence with the breakdown of the USSR. They're going for it all. And if they can get more, they can get more. The enemy is NATO, but NATO is acting like wusses. And he's right to say that. He says, you all proposed that Ukraine surrender. You offered Zelensky evacuation. And he said, I don't need evacuation. I need ammunition. Next slide. He says, Ukraine is fighting for all of Europe. NATO was created to fight only one war, not in Afghanistan, not in Syria. One war to save Europe from Russia, from Russian aggression. That's so true. The NATO lands, notice that Finland and Sweden recently entered NATO, even though their desire was to be neutral. They didn't want to form political alliances because of Russian aggression, because of Russia's attack against Ukraine. They were forced to join NATO, it seems to me. Because there's a history, especially with Finland and Sweden, between Russia and those countries. And Putin sees himself as another Peter the Great. Peter the Great is probably 6'8", and Putin's 5'7" at best. Maybe 135, 145 pounds, Putin. And Peter the Great was a hulking figure. But nonetheless, he fought the Great Northern War. And from 1700 to 1721, Putin's only been in Ukraine for 4 years. He learned from Peter the Great that endurance is a very important thing, and endurance is part of Russian leaders' DNA. It's certainly, Putin is a very savvy, a person with a great deal of calidity, and he has no problem if he can buffalo the Russian people long enough with trying to gain all of Ukraine and go on from there. Ukraine is the only country fighting this war, and we're still discussing whether it should be in NATO or not. This is a very tremendously important point, I think. We're sitting there seriously discussing, well, should we let Ukraine get into NATO? That might cause some problems. Ukraine's fighting for NATO. This is his point. It's a very powerfully articulated point. He says, Ukraine is the only country filling NATO mission, and we deny it everything. We're discussing the possibility of it joining NATO, when it's right now it's fighting a war for NATO. If Ukraine were not there, Poland would be occupied with Russian forces. How many senators are present? He goes on. We're going to Putin, Xi Jinping, and all others. They see this, and yes, Russia has North Korea. It has Cubans, it has African mercenaries, and we're still talking about escalation. So worried about sending NATO troops in Ukraine to do some of the fighting? Well, Russia's already been doing that, having their allies bringing soldiers to fight for them. And they're not worried about escalation. They're in NATO, the big pussies, right? They're sitting there worried about escalation. Well, we can't send troops necessarily because that would cause escalation. And who knows what would happen. You know what would happen? Russia would quickly lose the war. All right. He ends with, we have everything, military, political, economic power on our side, and we're still losing the war. Thanks to Ukraine, Russia hasn't realized Putin's dream, restoring the Russian Empire. But if Ukraine is forced into this deal, he's talking about the 28-point peace deal, Putin will fulfill his dream, and then, gentlemen, you'll be next, but you're not ready to fight. Really powerful stuff here. I'm going to go back to the 28-point peace plan to which he's referring here. And remember, the peace plan called for a reduction in the Ukrainian army from 800,000 to 600,000. It said a permanent ban on the possibility of Ukraine ever joining NATO. It allowed areas, Luhansk and Donetsk, to be entirely given to Russia, even though it doesn't occupy all of those territories, and two other oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson, to become Russian. Crimea, which is falling for the most part right before our eyes as I speak. Russia just can't defend it. It's more of a liability than an asset right now. And yet Putin's going to get that. This is a very desperate move by Putin. What's going on here, and I say this very sincerely, is Putin is losing the war. His economy is busted, nowhere to go. There's a run on some of the banks. The last U.S. bank pulled out of there. The ruble is, inflation could be as high as 30%, and I suspect that it is. The Russian story is that it's maybe 8% or something like that. Foodstuffs are expensive. There's no gasoline enough for Russians to have, and the gasoline prices go up. Simple commodities like milk and butter, the price of butter is astronomical, so much so it's under lock and key at Russian stores. At the front, injured soldiers are fighting. Diseased soldiers, HIV is prevalent, other diseases. Drunkenness, something that never been talked about. It's seldom talked about in all wars. I think drunkenness plays a large part, has played a large part in the history of warfare. Gives people their moxie, their bravery when it comes to charging an enemy. It's a lot easier to do if you're drunk and you're relatively insensate. But drunkenness is a real problem. And availability of vodka is not so ready for them, so they're drinking poisoned vodka, getting drunk on that. Some of them are dying that way. So there's a lot of rebellion, of sedition among the Russian soldiers who realize they're being treated just like, like meat going into a grinder. The leaders don't care about whether they live or die. They're being put on suicide missions without proper equipment, training, without life vests and things like that. And some of them are just saying, we're not going to do that. As many as 70,000 people have already deserted from the army, and many of which have surrendered. And they don't know. They're told that if they surrender, the Ukrainians are going to treat them bestially, perhaps execute them. They're finding out it's not true. They get treated civilly. But what we're talking about here, and what Kasparov is referring to, is the 28-point peace plan, which has been modified. A few thoughts on that. This is just ridiculous. This is a complete sellout by Putin to Ukraine, but it's also a sign of Putin's desperation. He's using a lot of hybrid warfare throughout NATO countries, and even in the United States, in terms of trying to influence as much as he can polls that favor Republicans, that favor Trump. So there's a lot of that going on, and it's a very desperate time for Putin. And you're going to see a lot of dire measures take. You're going to see an acceleration of bombing cities because he's running out of bombs. He's running out of missiles. He's running out of bullets. He's running low on drones, and he certainly doesn't have the tanks and other military vehicles. You see Russian soldiers moving forward in golf carts, sometimes on mules, oftentimes on motorcycles. It's a very desperate time, and Putin is using desperate measures. The attack on Pokrovsk, which will be the focus on an episode next week, that we had something like 150,000 Russian soldiers surrounding the city, some of whom infiltrated the city, and they haven't been able to take it yet with such overwhelming numbers. Ukraine is doing a marvelous job with their drones. So this is a very dire time for Ukraine. Putin is using desperate measures, and Ukraine, Zelensky needs to stay strong. NATO needs to stay united. Do not expect jack shit from the United States. As I said before, I'll iterate what I've said earlier, part of the show. Trump does not care about Ukrainians, doesn't care who wins the war, just like J.D. Vance said prior to his vice presidency. He doesn't really give a damn who wins the war, doesn't care about Ukraine. And Trump doesn't either. So when he talks about we got to stop the war, he's interested in winning a peace prize and all these accolades, talking about how many wars did he end already, 49 or 50? Keeps rising every time he speaks. And we hear the rhetoric, I am expert at stopping wars. I should be given a peace prize. And all the people, the lick spittles, those who suck it up to him, those who munch on his dingleberries. Yes, you should get the Nobel Peace Prize. And so that's what he's interested in. He doesn't care about that. And more than anything, he's interested in monetizing on this war. What can I do to stop the war? It's not a matter of, there's no sense whatsoever of justice. It's all the same whether Ukraine invaded Russia or Russia invaded Ukraine. It doesn't matter to him. I say that with utmost sincerity. What matters is there a way to stop the war that maximally benefits Donald J. Jackoff Trump? And that's what we're getting at here. Donald Trump wants to monetize as much as he can. That's why he treats this as a business deal. There's no moral element here. It doesn't matter who invaded whom. It doesn't matter whether Putin is really the bad guy and Ukraine is the good guy. The Kremlin is bad. Ukraine is good in this. And that's what's going on in this particular war. Very seldom do we get wars like that. Trump doesn't care about any of that. How do I stop the war in a way that maximally benefits me and pads my wallet? That's all he's concerned about. So what Kasparov is doing in this wonderful episode, and again, I'll send the link. I'll have the link at the end, and please access it and watch him. It's a very animated, very fiery, very cogently argued speech that I can't do justice to by reading, but I read it just so you could see visually some of the lines that he's articulating. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Please share this. Please like this. Please watch the video. Please watch other episodes of Eye on Ukraine. I'll try to do more social cultural stuff in upcoming shows to get away from some of the nastiness of the war and so forth. But I do think the war will end certainly sometime in 2026. Russia's economy just can't handle it anymore. There's going to be a breaking point. There will be a revolution, whether of oligarchs, peasants, people, the everyday people, oligarchs and people. And Putin is worried about his life at this point. So expect desperate measures, expect more bombing and shelling till he's out of bombs and shells, right? Just to try to frighten Ukraine and try to frighten Europe, right, into ending the war, or wants us to have Europe separate off from the countries of NATO, separate off from Ukraine, and just let it be a matter of Ukraine itself fighting against Russia. And I think Ukraine by itself can do pretty well, right, the way it's been doing things these days. Thank you for watching. Like and share. And TTFN.